Good morning and good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Richard Twine. I'm co-director of the Center for Human Animal Studies based at Edge Hill University. And this is the third seminar of our 2023 seminar series. And this was my idea. I've been aware of Iris's work for a couple of years now, and definite interest of mine also in terms of interrogating sustainability and in terms of thinking about its exclusions of non-human animals. So Iris was somebody who I definitely wanted to invite along to the CfHAS seminar series. So Dr. Iris Bergmann has a PhD from the University of Sydney, and over the years has been putting work into ideas of an interspecies concept of sustainability, including some applications and thinking around this in relation to the horse racing industry. And the title of Iris's talk today is Sustainability, a Dirty Word for Animal Advocates, the many ways in which animals are abandoned in sustainability discourses. So I'll hand you over to Iris now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I hope I have something to contribute to this discussion. I'd like to start where I started at the beginning when I started with my research and had these surprising experiences of the notion of sustainability and how little love there was for it within the animal studies community. So for me, it came very natural that the notion of sustainability entails all that is good, all that we as animal studies scholars consider to be essential for a good life for animals. But this was not universally seen as such. For example, the first conference I went to in 2015, I think it was, that was in India. At the conference dinner, I sat together at the table with a representative of a wildlife conservation organization in India, and he asked me what my research was. I cheerfully answered sustainability and animal protection. So immediately his hands went up. Didn't I know of the havoc the Sustainable Development Agenda wreaks on wildlife? Trying to explain that my work entails a critique of exactly that paradigm, the paradigm of sustainable development, and that I come from a different tradition of sustainability fell on deaf ears. So there was nothing that I could do to retrieve the situation, and it was the end of that conversation. My sense that in that context, the only savior would have been to not mention the S word at all. So I was confronted here with the fallout of the Sustainable Development Agenda and its impact on nature and wildlife in developing countries. Then at the same conference, I gave a talk on the intersection of sustainability and thoroughbred racing. It was one of my first talks on the topic. A professor of animal welfare and ethics with UK and Australian background was in the audience. He actually found it difficult to see a link between the two. Now, interestingly, there were two other in the audience who came from Germany. They were academics with art, historical, and musicological background, respectively. And for them, there was a natural connection between the two. Something worth of exploration here in its own right, it seems. It says something about differences in cultural backgrounds, perhaps, but in both ways, in terms of nationalities, but also in terms of the academic discipline. Now, with this talk, I'm departing a little bit from the earlier intentions that are in the abstract. I changed the scope a little. I will see how that goes. I will not spend as much time on the 2 points that I raised earlier on the sustainability and on the discourse within the sustainability community on animal protection, but more so on the animal studies community as such. I will integrate some of these other aspects along as we go along. Now, the sustainable development discourse has been vehemently criticized for its exploitation of farmed animals for human consumption at the expense of integrity of the animal, of farmed animals for human consumption at the expense of the integrity in terms of violating animal integrity, autonomy, justice, and privacy. And all these dimensions would be considered immoral and unethical in the human context. A brief look at I've undertaken a brief look at the journal Animals and searched sustainability, searched the entire journal for sustainability, and only captured a snapshot of what the diversity of publications that we can find there refer to when they bring the sustainable dimension into their animal science and animal welfare concerns. So much of the current research in animal sciences is designed to address sustainability concerns, mainly to reduce the environmental impact of animal agriculture, in particular the carbon footprint, to mitigate the stresses on the animals resulting from environmental changes, and to develop new animal industries for human food consumption. For example, a focus is on animal feed composition and supplements, such as feed for heat-stressed lactating dairy cows, to maintain or increase milk yield, reduce the risk of heat shock, and reduce methane emissions. Or the development of cooling systems for broiler factories to address sustainability concerns of environmental pressures resulting from rising global temperatures, flock heat stress, and limits on water availability. The impact of feed supplement on the meat quality of heat-stressed broilers is studied, and in agriculture, much research goes into the feed and feed supplements to reduce the impact on aquatic ecosystems. There's a variety of research into the development of the so-called sustainable use of octopi as a food source for humans. Another dimension is research into precision livestock farming. The attention is there directed at precision dairy and cattle technology, intelligent systems, animal behavior with deep learning, accelerometer, automatic milking systems, lameness, estrus detection, and electronic identification. All these studies, for all these studies, sustainability is only a background rationale for their foci. There's no interest in engaging with the notion of sustainability as such. And from a critical animal studies perspective, it becomes obvious that, again, here the commodification of the animal is driven to further heights. Other dimensions that we can find, interestingly, in this journal are encapsulated within the equine industry discourse. More specifically, there are two dimensions of interest. One, again, uses sustainability concerns as a background rationale, but it is limited to its social sustainability, that its social acceptability. In fact, the equestrian industry is greatly concerned in addressing concerns about horse welfare and training and competition at the elite level, but also at the leisure level. Pentathlon, for example, was already forced to give up its horse riding segment after a shocking incident at the Tokyo Olympics in 2021, where a rider was filmed hitting her horse repeatedly as he refused to jump in competition. Horse riding will be replaced with obstacle racing after the Paris 2024 Olympic Games. I'd love to see horse racing go down the same path with jockeys on wooden and knitted stick horses. Horse riding and equestrian cultures overall have emerged as an interesting area for the exploration of the intersection of sustainability and animal protection, as they render viable the many dimensions of sustainability not considered elsewhere and not deemed relevant by other animal industries. Moreover, for many, there's a genuine interest in facilitating host agency and well-being and interspecies relationships that are beneficial for the horses. In fact, in the leisure equestrian communities, there is even a big segment of people who are interested in what they now call the unridden horse. So they play with the horse on the ground without actually mounting it, and thus establish a totally new, different relationship with the horse. The other data that I collected was publications in animal studies that engage with sustainability. So here, specifically, I limited my sample. I only looked at the journal Animal Studies, Society and Animals. And for the whole overview, I looked at the past 5 years only, because it seemed to me that it was within the past 5 years, there was a change and a renewed or emerging or strengthening interest in the sustainability discourse. Still, this discourse is minuscule in volume, considering what is happening, what we can see, for example, published in the journal Animals, where there's so much of the exploitation focus on the animal to achieve sustainability goals represented in animal welfare science and animal science. But I must say the interest was even much smaller some 10 years ago or so. There's only a few writings that when I started that I could draw on that looked at the sustainability discourse. And I'll just cite them here for you. One is Earnshaw from 1991. That is the first that I could detect that looked at the sustainability paradigm from the animal perspective. She is based in the field of law, and she looked at the paradigm of sustainability and used interspecies equity as the main criterion for formulating a sustainability that incorporates the interests of animals. So interspecies equity, as we know, these concerns, equity and justice, have been much further developed in recent years now. Now, in 2006 came the next publication by Rawlis. She talked about sustainable development and animal welfare. She states that animal welfare is a neglected dimension in sustainable development, but she also found that it is an anathema to sustainable development. The Sustainable Development Agenda is not interested in engaging with animal welfare because it would just hinder their progress. Then there were Buller and Morris from 2008, who looked at the agricultural sustainability and farm animals and looked at it from a community perspectives, creating communities of rural landscapes. But there was a bit of a problem. I find that in their analysis, they did not consider the lack of agency that farm animals had, and that this rural community really was based on their exploitation at all, and there was no equal standing. So there is nothing that we could build on to create sustainable communities with farm animals the way agriculture was operating. Then there's, of course, Richard's work from 2010, Animals as Biotechnology. And in 2015 came Boscadan and Bossert, who looked as well as sustainable development and non-human animals and discussed the anthropocentric focus of the Sustainable Development Agenda. But then in 2028, Boscadan published her article as a single author, talking about greenwashing of the animal industrial complex, the sustainable intensification, and the livestock revolution, which is really a shocking summary of what it means to exploit animals in the animal industrial complex with the means that we have and are constantly refining. So this was the beginning, really, of the looking at sustainability and animal protection interface. But we can already see here a deeper engagement with the sustainability question really comes from critical animal studies scholars. And I will discuss a little bit further what the problems are if you don't come with this tradition, but still try to engage with the sustainability dimension. So over the past 5 years, then there was some movement, more things started to happen. Looking at I tried to establish first what did actually happen within the animal studies community that is represented in journal Society and Animals. As this is a journal that was one of the early, still strong going journals of the intersection of animal studies. It was launched in 1993, and it publishes studies that describe and analyze our experiences of non-human animals from the perspective of various disciplines within both the social sciences and humanities. They deal with subjects from human-animal interaction in various settings, so the politics of animal welfare and the animal rights movement. So with this broad spectrum, one might hope that if they engaged with sustainability, there could be some fruitful results for animals in that. But undertaking the search, simply looking for the term sustainability within that journal, retrieved 289 citations of 1,104 items. However, the vast majority of them were relevant as terms like sustainability, sustainable, were only used as signifiers and not in any way analyzed or standing for a deeper interrogation of the concept. A few items use reference to sustainability or sustainable development, generally in the introduction to underline the relevance of the discussion. They then refer to the UN Sustainable Development Agenda, to their Sustainable Development Goals, or also to education for sustainable development, but this had no consequence for their analysis or their discussion. It was simply an underlining of the relevance of their topic they were exploring. But perhaps this is worth mentioning and taking note of, as it shows that the UN documentations and policy documents are somewhat respected within some communities and taken note of. So there's a general acceptance of this discourse and of the need to engage with it at that level. Other concepts that referred to and acknowledged as being in need of discussion and as linked to the advancement of animal welfare and interests, and that were used by these authors that I identified, are Sustainable Human Development Index, Sustainable Development in the Livestock Sector, Sustainable Human-Animal Relationships, Sustainable Transition Research, and one text dealt with the paradoxes of the notion of sustainable meat and called for a new sustainable food story. Another one discussed the tensions between sustainable human livelihoods for local indigenous communities and elephant protection in Cambodia, with the aim of building mutually beneficial and non-exploitative reciprocal relationships with the elephants. Further, an article investigated business students' perceptions of the Dutch Party for Animals in order to reflect on the political representation of non-humans. And this was placed within the context of the party's orientation toward the ethical underpinning of deep ecology, recognition of the importance of sustainability, and increased societal support for animal rights and welfare. Now, these were only 12 texts out of the 1104 items that somewhat contextualize their work within sustainability discourse. And 2 of these have been authored or co-authored by the same author. So all in all, the results of this journal search has not demonstrated that the animal studies community overall has a great interest in engaging with the notion of sustainability. And this is a similar phenomenon in the context of climate change research in the social sciences, which is why, in fact, Richard Twine asks, where are the non-human animals in the sociology of climate change? Still, I found 2 articles that are worth mentioning here within the question we are looking at. These are articles that actually weren't published by Society and Animals, but these were articles that were cited into the art texts that I have identified. They are relevant as, in one case, the author uses the notion of sustainability as an analytical tool, and in the other case, a new sustainability is being formulated. So I begin with the latter example. Gürsoy, subject are horse-drawn carriages on a Turkish island as an example to study sustainability at the nexus of human-animal interaction with the aim to transition to multi-species and hybrid sustainability. The author refers to the need to a sociocultural transition based on new non-exploitative cultural values and social practices and new socio-technical processes built through new collective sustainable imaginaries of travel and tourism without the exploitation of forces. So obviously here's an author who values the notion of sustainability and sees it as an ideal tool to advance animal interests. This is contrasted with a work authored by Srinivasan titled Conservation Biopolitics and the Sustainability Episteme. It serves as an example of the use of sustainability frameworks as an analytical tool, and insofar it is in fact exemplary in doing this, to critically analyze practices that impact animals. In this case, it is about turtle conservation measures. Srinivasan draws on empirical research on the olive ridley turtles conservation in Odisha, India, and on Foucault's writings on biopower and epistemes. Following Foucault, she translates the notion of sustainability into the sustainability episteme. An episteme can be thought of as a paradigm or taken for granted assumption, normalizing a particular set of values and choices with views outside such paradigm dismissed as ill-founded. According to her, the sustainability episteme promotes the view that it is possible to treat 2 dimensions that are often in conflict and separate from each other. This is economic growth and development on the one hand, and the contradictory logics of sustainability thinking, which proclaims that there is a win-win even in the face of contradictory goals. In the case of turtle conservation, it means that a normative consensus exists not only of the importance of olive ridley survival, but also of the importance of addressing human interest by supporting local livelihoods and regional development. Both goals can be pursued simultaneously by devaluing the plight of individual turtles and instead focusing on the survival of collectivities such as species, population, or ecosystem. Individuals and the well-being are thus considered sacrificable. Now, moreover, the resulting conservation model is characterized by the co-formulation of harm and care. Care is expressed by regulating human activity that causes harm. Rather than banning harming activities, acceptable harm is calculated. Care and harm thus go hand in hand, and she refers to this as the sacrificial logic. The killing of turtles translates into protection because it creates wider support for conservation by providing economic incentives to local communities. Srinivasan found that Foucault's biopolitical analytical framework casts useful light on the links between dominant ontologies, in this case collectivities, and the co-articulation of care and harm and conservation. However, it is the conceptualization of the sustainability episteme that facilitates foregrounding the political functions of these ontologies of the collectivity. It allows for the mitigation of conflicts that emerge from the clashes of competing non-human and human interests, suggesting the possibility of a win-win. This win-win promise would be more challenging if individual turtles were to be protected. Furthermore, it sees the reason of the dominance of the collectivity's ontologies, which dominate contemporary conservation, in its capacity to sustain the contradictory logics of sustainability. Now, while this is a great example of the use of sustainability as an analytical framework, I also notice that this sustainability the author describes and the relevant sources she's drawing on are actually based on the notion of sustainable development. And this is crucial. It is important in the sustainability discourse to distinguish between sustainability and sustainable development. In her text, the notion of sustainability is being used synonymously with sustainable development. And why I believe this is problematic, I will get back to further below. Now, there are a number of other theoretical developments in the intersection of sustainability and animal protection, which can be categorized as per the following three strands. The strengthening of animal rights and welfare at the UN and in the instruments policy agenda, including the Sustainable Development Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Then there's the proposal of the introduction of an 18th Sustainable Development Goal, which is animal welfare. And then there are various approaches to redefining sustainability as multi-species sustainability, interspecies sustainability, or some other forms. Now, the redefinition of sustainability embeds animals is of particular interest. So I give a few examples here. Ruprecht refers to multi-species sustainability. There's Ruprecht and his co-authors. They developed 6 principles in which multi-species sustainability might be grounded. The needs of species are interdependent. Other species have agency and transformative potential, and this requires multi-species representation. Multi-species well-being is relation-based, not resource-based. Autonomous local multi-species actors need to participate in management systems, and all species have to have operational autonomy so they can continuously renegotiate their complex and tangled multi-species interests so the systems can adapt and self-regulate. And finally, the diverse anticipatory features and capacities of species and communities of interacting species need to be allowed to come to bear. From these principles, they propose the following preliminary definition of sustainability. Multi-species sustainability means meeting the diverse, changing, interdependent, and irreducibly inseparable needs of all species of the present, while enhancing the ability of future generations of all species to meet their own needs. Syntactically, this is closely modeled on part of the Brundtland's definition of sustainable development that is widely cited today and that has been the guide for sustainable development since 1987. But it sits in opposition to the belief in human supremacy and non-humans as resources, as espoused by adherents of mainstream notions of sustainable development and coldly expressed in the Brundtland report. Ruprecht et al. Emphasized the need for the participation of autonomous local multi-species actors, pointing out that underrepresentation of actors and stakeholders in decisions and actions around sustainability issues can be identified as a leading cause of failure. However, the authors have not developed in more detail how non-human actors can be included in such participatory processes. But luckily, there are a number of authors who specialize in exactly that question that we can draw on, and that I suggest to actually drawn for the sustainability discourse and for modeling new sustainabilities. Now, just a couple of months ago, a new definition that departs markedly from previous ones has been published. Dury and his co-author propose that sustainability is primarily an ethical issue which connects people, the planet on which we live, and the animals, other organisms which inhabit it. In fact, in contrast to the classical three circles that we see in definitions of sustainability, which espouse the environment, society, and the economy, Dury and his co-author suggest that it is people, planet, and animals that should be situated in these circles. Their definition of sustainability states that in all decisions and actions on any scale, from the individual to the institutional, we should minimize our immediate and future negative impact on humans, other animals, and the planet, while simultaneously maximizing our positive impacts on these domains. So these are the essential elements of the definition: minimizing negative impact, maximizing positive impact. Another novel dimension is that they exclude the economy entirely from their definition, as economy is not a constant, it is a human construct that can be changed overnight if there's a political will. It is not relevant to be included. However, they emphasize the importance of discussing the current dominant neoliberal system and the impact it has on human, animals, and the planet, and to be able to actually achieve a transformation to sustainability and identify the ways to get there. Now, in which ways has the animal been let down in the sustainability discourse? So I'd like to bring up a few issues there. For once, there's not sufficient engagement from animal studies scholars with the notion of sustainability. I believe this interest resides in the early and ongoing critique of the paradigm of sustainable development. It is identified, it treats animals, it has been identified that animals are treated as resources for human use. The paradigm is recognized as being speciesist, as placing animals at the bottom of the hierarchy, of an anthropocentric hierarchy, and sustainable development agenda and sustainable development goals are recognized as being anthropocentric, reproducing the predominant worldview of a neoliberal system. Human interests, human goods, and human values are the focal point. Animals are made to fit into that system, compromising their integrity, well-being, and leaving no room for self-determination. They are objectified, commodified to, in fact, achieve the sustainable development goals. So here we come back to the problematic of conflating the notion of sustainability and sustainable development. In fact, in doing that, we let the animal down because we foreclosing opportunities to develop other sustainability models. But it is that this is being done is perhaps based on a lack of historical understanding, and this is something that we need to bring back to the fore and consider in our deliberations. The notion of sustainable development was deliberately chosen in a long negotiating process. It was to substitute the idea of sustainability, which would have been too radical. It was popularized with the Bergmann report. The tensions that needed to be reconciled for the formulation of the Bergmann report involved those between present versus future generations, economic versus environmental perspective, north versus south, and scientific accuracy versus political acceptability. In fact, it has been stated that this is very exactly the genius of the piece lies in the adoption and promulgation of the concept of sustainable development. It effectively bridged the intellectual and political gap between those, particularly in the developing world, arguing for economic growth, and those, particularly in the developed world, arguing for environmental protection. However, this story goes even further and continues into the future. It has long been argued that the notion of sustainable development has been appropriated by industry, political and development interests. And indeed, it has been shown that business has become the defining force of sustainable development. From the Earth Summit in 1992 to the one in 2002 and then in 2012, corporate interests increased their discursive power and became successful in gaining control. Thus, the role of business in sustainable development shifted from being largely undefined in 1992 to being considered a sustainable development partner in 2022, and finally to becoming a driver of sustainable development. And this development is continuing. So this has been identified by critical animal studies scholars in various forms. And this is part of the reason, I believe, while there's a lack of engagement and lack of interest, it penetrates the whole thinking and the whole discourse about sustainability within the animal studies community. Now, this unleashing, this gaining control of business interest has globally led to the unleashing of most destructive forces, which are now being accumulated in the hands of a minority of financial actors, driving species extinction, climate catastrophe. The growth of dominant development imperatives have now led to what has been referred to as total extractivism. And this extreme commodification, appropriation of animals has driven to ever extreme heights to, in fact, fulfill this agenda. And it is a logical development in this historical process. Injustices committed against animals raised for food relate to the extreme incarceration and the biotechnological alterations of the bodies under the banner of efficiency for sustainable production, has also been identified by Twine. And this has immense physiological and psychological implications for the animals themselves and further entrenches their status as production systems and factories rather than living sentient beings. So it is no wonder then that many animal advocates are skeptical of the notion of sustainability altogether. And what Srinivasan has analyzed or found through the application of the sustainability episteme is not by coincidence. It's in fact constructed through this thinking. So particular animals, critical animal studies scholars can identify the problems with this and see through this. But those who lay their faith in the sustainable development agenda, it could be problematic to supporting it, as there is perhaps little potential in leading to transformation for animals. And it may come to a further blow to them to realize that whatever transformative character there may have been or there is hope to be, it has been limited, as shown in a study by Bergmann and co-authors. He conducted an analysis of 3,000 scientific studies on the Sustainable Development Goals, published between 2016 and 2021. And they found that the goals have had some political impact on institutions and policies, from local to global governance, but the impact has been largely discursive, affecting the way actors understand and communicate about sustainable development. But more profound normative and institutional impact, from legislative action to changing resource allocations, remains rare. and the evidence suggests only limited transformative political impact of the Sustainable Development Goals thus far. Now, this does not bode well for achieving progress for animals through the Sustainable Development Agenda. So, in light of this slow progress and the cautionary note in terms of identifying the Sustainable Development Agenda, its attention, its lack of impact, should we continue to expand efforts in advancing the sustainability discourse for animal interests? I also note that I have in practice, in policy documents, there is very little reference to animals and animal advocates working on the ground for animal protection. Largely are skeptical of the dimension of sustainability. So despite these efforts redefining sustainability that are also there, that I have presented just then, is there, what use is there hanging on to the notion of sustainability when seeking to advance the interests of animals? So I'm not sure whether there's interest in discussing that, but yeah, I would love to hear from you on that. So yeah, thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Iris, for that talk and that overview of lots of relevant issues to this debate. I could probably ask some things, but I should definitely open it up to others. Do they have some comments or questions for Iris? You can just unmute yourself and turn your video on, or use the chat function if you like. Yeah. They're still digesting the topic, maybe.
Perhaps are there any who are engaged with the notion of sustainability and can tell us a bit about their work?
Yeah.
But if you have questions, Richard, so maybe
well, there was a couple of things that came to my mind that it was interesting, obviously, to kind of hear about your survey of society and animals and the animal studies literature, and to find that there was quite a neglect of sustainability, and your explanation of that seemed to be in terms of a kind of potentially of a kind of skepticism or even cynicism towards the concept, or maybe there's just a lack of numbers of people in animal studies who have engaged with the topic. But yeah, all the ones that you mentioned were the ones that I'm mostly familiar with. And then also your second point about the work that's been done to look at the impact of the Sustainable Development Goals. And yeah, I've seen that research that you mentioned that basically suggested that the impact of the SDGs is essentially quite discursive, and the danger then is that it becomes a kind of tool for greenwashing for institutions to decorate all their websites with SDGs, and you know, we have it you know, in universities in the UK, a lot of universities use a system called Pure, which is just a way of having different profile pages for different academics and to kind of outline their work. And what's become normalized within the Pure system is to have the little images of the SDGs attached to an academic's work.
Right.
to show this is how their work is contributing to this or that SDG. But yeah, it seems to me that it's just quite decorative. And universities, of course, are guilty of slowing change, just like most other institutions are as well. And then I think back to, well, the United Nations, we need to think critically about what United Nations is doing, and in the past they've also had the Millennium Development Goals, didn't they? Which preceded the Sustainable Development Goals, and as I understand it, none of those Millennium Goals were actually met. And the SDGs have targets, don't they, for 2030, and it seems unlikely that they're going to be met, which isn't to say that it's not useful to have some goals in the first place, but yeah, there's surely a space for thinking critically about what the United Nations is doing in creating these goals and what they really hope for them to achieve, especially when some of the work of the United Nations is actually potentially making their achievement less likely. So yeah, does anybody have any comments and or questions? I'm just going to mute myself just because I've got people doing work on my house and there's some background noise. So I'm going to mute myself for a second. Hopefully somebody would come forward with a comment or a question, or just to discuss how their work relates to sustainability. Mariam.
Hi, I'm trying to turn my video. Okay, there. I was going to answer this earlier, but I was making a cup of tea. Your question about, do I work on sustainability? The answer is no, not at all. But I will be, I think I have plans to. But what I do is I teach a core course on animals on an MA program, which is entitled Ecologies, Theory and Culture. So I haven't really got anything to offer. It's just really an observation. The students that we get on those courses often come from science backgrounds or evolutionary developmental biology and that kind of thing, but they also often come from, for example, from architecture or a very diverse range of students. And I know that they don't want to do my course. They don't want to do my module, and they wouldn't do it, except that it's a course, because it's a core course, so it's compulsory, they have to do it. And it's quite an interesting experience. I should say, I think, they say that they all love the course and it's one of their favorite courses. But what I don't do is really, I point to the tensions very early. I'm talking about something wider here than sustainability, but the issue of ecology as a whole, on kind of ecological discourses, environmental discourses, the tensions between that and their module as a whole. And it's okay because the person who teaches the other part, Martin Savransky, doesn't exactly teach ecologies in a very conventional way. So the tensions are less visible than they might otherwise be. But I do see them struggle. We're entering the third year of teaching this program now. I do see them struggle with that question, especially by the time they've gone to the end of my course, which is very much about week by week looking at the way in which we frame questions of, for example, racism and speciesism and that kind of thing, but also very much about animals and animal interests. So the whole second half of the module is completely dedicated solely to what animals do, what animals like, what animals don't like, those kinds of things. And only later on in the term do I raise Gay Bradshaw's point that the language that we use in kind of conservation and areas like this, and we do get a lot of conservation and welfare people coming as well, is inherently kind of tilted in one direction. So, and she makes the point that we use the word culling instead of genocide, and we use the word translocation when we mean deportation. So I will be working more in this area in the future, and at the moment I don't, but it's just really just an observation, a contribution, especially if no one else is speaking right now, to, you know, that real tension, and it exists in the classroom as well as elsewhere, I think. That's it. I'm going to turn my video off. Few.
Iris, did you have any reply to that comment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question I ask myself all the time. Perhaps it is persistence that pays off. It's often said persistence and continuing with that work. I mean, this is in a way, perhaps I console myself with that. Bringing these ideas closer to others is also still alerting them to the issues, and perhaps a seed is sown that we don't see yet. And we also need kind of, I feel like that we need watchdogs, like to keep the bastards honest, really, to unveil all this all the time that has happened in the sustainability discourse, even if we are skeptical of its impact or potential, at least we unveiling the lies. So perhaps that's the purpose of it.
Yeah, I mean, I often feel in my own teaching that one of the reasons the course has impact, and one of the reasons why, I mean, I don't want to sing the praises of my own course, that anybody could do this and find this material, but I think it's partly because there seems to be the word animals and species and so on, they seem continuously to be used without necessarily, when many of the people who are using those terms actually don't know anything about animals or anything much about the animals that they're talking about, and if they do, they only know about it in very kind of limited and constrained kinds of ways. So it feels to me, even within science, there's no joined up thinking around these areas.
Mm-hmm.
So that's work to be done, I think.
Abby, you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, hi. Yes, thanks, Iris. I really enjoyed the presentation. It was a great opportunity just to think a little bit more in depth around this term, which is everywhere. And it really resonated with the work that I'm doing and some of what you were saying. I'm working on the SDG 2 area, which is all about hunger, ending hunger and malnutrition, and bringing critical animal studies to bear on what's going on in that little world. And yeah, what really struck me was that sort of absolute refusal of a kind of critical animal study perspective, any sniff of animal rights or anything, and because of that kind of absolute adherence to a neoliberal humanism, which pervades all of the SDGs. And so whichever SDG you go into, you come across that saying, I'm sorry, those agendas are not allowed in here, they're somehow threatening, and we don't speak that language. So all the words have to be changed, like you were saying. And I also found, I mean, what was really striking, and I think, you're coming across a similar thing here, is that it's not just the sort of dominant discourse that is easy to critique, but also concerning within the radical communities around, agroecology and food sovereignty that I'm working in. Again, that continues, that humanist adherence continues there. Yeah. And there is no alternative. There is no alternative space. There's just voices outside that, but there's no kind of real coalescence of that in a political way. So that's something that, of course, the hunger agenda has recently been transformed to sustainable food systems. So we're not looking at hunger at all now. We're really looking at sustainable food systems. That's the new kind of global agenda within which to think hunger. But hunger's kind of human hunger is kind of getting a bit lost in the background of sustainability now. And just a few thoughts as you were talking. I mean, on sustainability, I was thinking, it's quite a conservative. This is why it's so helpful, I guess, for the establishment. It's a fundamentally sort of conservative word because it requires a suffix, doesn't it? Sustainability of. Like, it doesn't mean anything by itself. You might assume that everyone's talking about the same thing, but we're not. So you can have sustainability of anything in development projects, for example. So it's fundamentally not about transformation, or the transformation is often that's introduced, that's required, the transformative, the transformation of systems that's required for sustainability, that you hear that formula all the time. If you actually look at the transformation, it's about maintaining the core elements of the status quo while transforming certain aspects of it that might look all shiny, like digitalizing things, or doing introducing AI or precision or whatever, but actually it's about maintaining the current trajectory that we're moving towards more than anything else. And just to comment also on the discussion that Richard picked up on around sustainable development goals, and there's a danger that it's just rhetorical. Well, I would also say there's a danger that's better than the substance sometimes, because if we actually scratch the surface of the SDGs and look at what's going on in terms of how the targets and the indicators are actually being formulated and what that actually means they're about, that's fairly terrifying. So actually the biggest danger is that the SDGs would be effectively implemented rather than just rhetorical. And so that's something which perhaps requires more discussion, but that's just also something that's in my work. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think that's really worth looking at. What does it actually mean? Because I mean, there's the critique there that there are goals that are contradictory. They can't be achieved simultaneously, and they're not, in fact, sustainable at all. So, yeah, I think that would be worth looking into this more deeply. But this is really like banging on against the dominant thinking currently. It's hard work, but I also have been looking recently into the transition literature, and I've been thinking too that this might be perhaps an interesting area to pursue further, because yes, it has this future dimension of transitioning to an interspecies sustainability, perhaps, right? It has this action component that people can imagine getting involved and actually doing something, because I believe there is a need or a desire to do something, right? To be involved somehow in change, because we just are so worried about what is happening, but don't know where to actually intervene. So reconceptualizing the whole issue as a transformative concept might actually help. So I've been thinking about that, whether this is worth pursuing.
Thank you, Abby, for your comments. Would anybody else like to make a comment or ask a question of Iris? Or take the chance to say something about their own work as well? Okay, then maybe we'll end it there. Thanks to Abby and Mariam for that discussion. And this talk will be appearing in time on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to refer back to it. So I'd just like to finish by thanking Iris very much for sharing her ideas and research with us, and we look forward to staying in touch with you in the future in relation to your research.